In this video, we are going to create a fabric. This is one of the tasks we will perform from the Manage tab in Nexus Dashboard. Therefore, we will navigate to Manage and select Fabrics option. As you can see, I already have several fabrics in this Nexus Dashboard, and we are going to add one more. To do this, we must select the Actions option on the right side of the screen, followed by the Create a Fabric option. But before we begin, let's define what is a fabric. Simply by clicking on the Help section within this area, we will see a detailed explanation on what fabrics are. Fabrics are on-premise network regions that include a group of switches and other network devices that provides connectivity to your applications and endpoints. They might be split in different availability zones, such as pods, that are analyzed and managed by Nexus Dashboard. There are three main types of switches. Let's take a quick look at the switch types that can be part of a Nexus Dashboard fabric. ACI switches. These are switches running ACI software managed by an Application Policy Infrastructure Controller (APIC) cluster. You can onboard existing ACI fabrics to Nexus Dashboard for continuously streaming telemetry. But we will review this topic in another video. NXOS switches. These are a group of Nexus switches running NXOS software. Nexus Dashboard manages and monitors NXOS switches using best practice templates. You can add a fresh set of NXOS switches for greenfield deployments or onboard existing NXOS switches to an existing fabric for incremental management and monitoring. In this video, we will focus on this scenario. Non-Nexus switches and devices. Nexus Dashboard supports onboarding a variety of non-Nexus switches and service appliances such as iOS XE, iOS XR, firewalls, load balancers for a campus VXLAN EVPN fabric, IPN, ISN, and Layer 4 to Layer 7 service deployments. And just like with the topic of ACI, this is a subject for another video. However, it is important to note that we could also have multiple fabrics in the same geographic location. This is part of the flexibility offered by Nexus Dashboard. Now, let's return to the process. As you can see, it is a 5-step process for creating a new fabric. We will describe each of these steps. Let's begin with selecting a category. At this stage, we must determine whether we are going to create a structure using switches that already have existing configurations, also known as brownfield, or if we are going to use new or unused switches that will be configured from scratch, what we refer to as greenfield. It is also important to remember that when this Nexus Dashboard cluster was installed, we selected the option to use it for managing LAN scenarios. For this reason, the option to create a SAN fabric does not appear. The options available at this step are Create a new LAN fabric or greenfield, Onboard existing LAN fabric or brownfield, Onboard ACI fabric, where we can connect to an APIC cluster of an existing fabric or to another Nexus Dashboard cluster that already contains created fabrics. Nexus Dashboard also allows us to upload a fabric snapshot. That is, we can capture the stage of a fabric to analyze it offline. This scenario applies if you wish to perform a configuration analysis rather than actively managing the device configurations, which is a valid use case. However, as you can see here, that option currently appears disabled. This is the default state within Nexus Dashboard. Enabling this option is quite simple. Simply navigate to Admin, System Settings, General, Advanced Settings, Edit, and enable the Enable Fabric Snapshot Creation option. Once you return to the Create Fabric section, you will see that this new option available. However, we will cover that in another video. In this video, we are going to create a new LAN fabric. We select that option and proceed to the second step. Select a type. This step is crucial, as we will be selecting the specific template we wish to use for our new fabric. Let's review the types of fabrics available here. VXLAN is definitely one of the most widely used types today, as it enables us to automate a VXLAN BGP EVPN fabric for Nexus switches running NXOS and/or Catalyst switches running iOS XE. When selecting this type, we must specify whether our intention is to use it to create a complete data center fabric, that is, using Nexus switches, or a campus fabric in which we will configure Catalyst or Nexus switches as border gateways. Classic LAN allows us to create a new network known as Enhanced Classic LAN, specifically a scenario incorporating switches that perform core, aggregation, and access functions. AI includes templates designed to automate a high-performance Nexus NXOS network using Rocky version 2. In this case, we will choose between two types, routed or VXLAN EVPN. External and inter-fabric connectivity enable us to configure fabric interconnection networks across different geographic locations using NXOS, iOS XE, iOS XR, or selected third-party devices. Routed enable us to automate the configuration of BGP-based fabrics in NXOS. IP Fabric for Media is a type of network specialized in broadcasting, and we also have a predefined template. And finally, Data Broker. Yes, some of you will remember it from previous releases. It enables the configuration of switches for SPAN, Switched Port Analyzer, and TAP, Test Access Point. For this video, I'm going to create a classic LAN style network. However, if you would like to see more options, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments of this video. And so we move to step number 3, Settings. For the configuration mode, we must choose between Default and Advanced. When using the default options, we only need to specify the fabric name, the location, the BGP autonomous system, the switch license type, whether we wish to enable telemetry, as this will automate the configuration on the switches to send information to the Nexus Dashboard cluster. The difference lies in the fact that in advanced mode, we are required to specify 4 additional parameters, such as the protocol for BRF Lite, either eBGP, OSPF, or none. If telemetry is enabled, we must specify whether the information will be received via the out-of-band or in-band network. We must indicate whether telemetry data will be transmitted using IPv4 or IPv6. And finally, the security domain. It is important to note that regardless of the mode selected at this stage, it can be modified later using the Edit option for the Create Fabric. Next, we proceed to step 4, where we review the entire summary of the provided parameters and submit the configuration. Once Submit is clicked, the fabric creation process begins, and all that remains is to wait a few seconds. Once the fabric creation is complete, we will see a message displaying the fabric's details, with options to add switches to this fabric or create a new fabric. Let's take a look at the details of this fabric. At this moment, it is completely empty. However, as I mentioned earlier, we can go to Actions and select Edit Fabric to make any adjustments we might have overlooked during the initial creation process. Now, let's add some switches and see how simple the process is. There are several ways to achieve this. We could navigate to the Inventory tab and add the switches there. However, we will proceed by using the blue Actions button and selecting Add Switches, a method that allows us to discover the switches. We will provide an initial IP address for the discovery process. This corresponds to the IP address of the management port of any of the switches we intend to include in this fabric. Next, we select the authentication method. The default setting is MD5, and this also serves as the default access method for Nexus devices when connecting via SSH. Then, we enter the username and password. Here, you will notice a specific checkbox labeled Set as Individual Device Write Credentials. Many people have asked me when should this box be checked and when shouldn't. Well, the Nexus Dashboard allows us to configure what we call device credentials. These act as default credentials used to connect to devices when changing devices configurations. This configuration is performed within the Manage tab under the Device Credentials option. In the event that the credentials for connecting to the switch we are adding are different from the default ones, we must flag this switch so that, once added the switch, those credentials are saved and used to connect to it instead of the default credentials. Next, we will select how many hops, starting from that switch, we wish to traverse in search of additional switches, allowing for a maximum of 7 hops. And finally, thought of great importance, we must indicate whether or not we wish to retain the existing configuration of the switches added to this fabric, simply by checking or unchecking this option. In this case, we will be using new switches, therefore we will not retain any previous configurations. Consequently, a confirmation note appears indicating that all configuration settings will be deleted. After clicking the Discovery option, all that remains is to wait. Nexus Dashboard will then display the switches it has detected. For those switches where the username and password credentials match, we can add them to the fabric. We simply need to select them and click Add Switches. Next, a blue bar will appear during the switch adoption process, displaying the status in progress. Once this process is completed, the bar will turn green indicating switch added, and the operation will be finished. We click Close and immediately afterward we will begin to see the information loading within the fabric. However, let's now navigate to the Inventory section. As you can see, we have now discovered 2 switches. Now, let's return to the fabric. We can observe that the information regarding the switches we associated with the fabric has started to populate. We could begin configuring them now, but that will be the subject for another video.